Welcome to Take It from the Iron Woman. My name is Susanne Müller, your host and the Iron Woman. This podcast is about empowering yourself and others to make real changes in the world. You will hear from everyday, smart, sophisticated, hip people like you and me. Not everybody has to be an Iron Woman to impress the world. Together, we will learn from the sports and business leaders how you can become a more successful person as an entrepreneur or a leader. It's one step at a time, one day at a time. Take your steps now. Take your big steps now. Join me on this journey to success. This podcast is being sponsored by Get Loopy. On episode 41, you can hear the story of Isabel, the co-founder and CEO. Get Loopy, get a 20% discount off your first order. GetLoopy.com. Take it from the Iron Woman. I always say we have only special guests, and certainly today with Kwame, we have a very special guest. So I'm very honored to have Kwame Christian with us. I don't need to say too much. He has a podcast, Negotiate Anything. He has a TEDx. He's the director of American Negotiation Institute. He has a book, Nobody Will Play With Me. I just heard he does mixed martial arts. He's a tennis player. I don't know. What else can I say? Kwame, welcome. Maybe you have something else that you would like to share.
Well, I guess since it's the day after Father's Day, I have a son, a 4-year-old named Kai, and my wife is a doctor, Whitney Christian. So I think that pretty much rounds it out.
That's amazing. Happy Father's Day. We all need to celebrate happy occasions, especially in those difficult times. I got introduced to you by my friend Sue Mattis, who is a real estate broker at Compass in New York. And she says, you need to meet Kwame. And I know Sue Mattis is fairly critical. So if she says you need to meet the person, I think that means something. And she says, he's really good. I had a class with him about negotiation. I use him now as my coach. And he's also fun. He's down to earth. Give us a little insight on who you are and what you do on any given day.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And yes, Sue is, I love Sue. She is amazing. Mm-hmm. It means a lot to me that she said that I'm down to earth and make it fun, because a lot of times when people think about negotiation, mm-hmm. they don't think about a fun experience. Mm-hmm. And because of that, it leads them to shy away from it. But the way that I look at negotiation, it's any time you're in a conversation and somebody wants something. And so we're negotiating all the time. The question is whether or not we're doing it well. So I try to keep it fun and approachable, mm-hmm. so people can learn. And so with the American Negotiation Institute, we have the podcast. That's where we reach out to as many people as we can, mm-hmm. with all that free content every week. And then mm-hmm. we do negotiation trainings and coaching, and we have an online course. So it's very fun to see it building slowly mm-hmm. over time.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And so you said you have a challenge that you want to be on 100 podcasts. And when I do the math, typically to do one podcast is like you're spending an hour with the podcast, the interview, you prepare a little bit. So that equals to 100 hours. And I don't think you will take, let's say, 2 weeks or 1 week out of your busy schedule because you're already busy. If, let's say, you do 20 hours podcasting, how do you envision, when will you be done, and when can we hear all those 100 podcasts?
Yeah, I think it's going to take longer than I originally thought.
Okay.
I was thinking, okay, let's get it done by the end of the summer. And that was during COVID time.
Yes.
And so things were very slow. But since then, obviously COVID is still a thing, but mm-hmm. in America, there's a lot of social unrest as it relates to racial injustice. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people have been reaching out to me talking about how we can take content driven towards how to have difficult mm-hmm. conversations, but mm-hmm. make it specifically for how to have difficult conversations about race. And since mm-hmm. then, the schedule has filled up significantly. And every time I get a gig, I say to myself, well, that's one more podcast that I need to postpone. So hopefully by the end of the year, we can get to that number.
Tell us about how to have difficult conversations about race. I mean, this is such a topic that we need to talk about. Give us some insights, Kwame.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's tough. And I think that's the first
Mm-hmm.
thing. It's tough for everybody to have these conversations. And I think it's important to come to terms with the fact that it's difficult, because sometimes people would say, okay, it's too hard, I feel uncomfortable, and they're going to use that as a reason to not have the conversation. But that is the exact mentality that leads to the perpetuation of the problems that we see today. We have to get through that discomfort. There's something better on the other side. And it goes right in line with my motto. The best things in life are on the other side of difficult conversations. And if we want to change the world, we have to talk about it too. So the framework that I use is from my book, Nobody Will Play With Me. Soon it's going to be rebranded and renamed as Finding Confidence in Conflict, because I think a lot of people would understand that better of the of the name.
Yeah.
But the framework is called compassionate curiosity. And the first step is, number 1, acknowledge and validate emotions. 2, get curious with compassion. And 3, joint problem solving. And this is the framework that I use for all difficult conversations. But the way that I look at it, the more emotional and difficult the conversation is on an interpersonal level, the more closely we need to hold true to that framework, because any deviation can lead to some serious problems when it comes to the breakdown of the conversation and potentially the relationship.
Yeah, and we all have emotions, right? And we need to learn, if you say this is difficult, maybe we start a conversation, this is difficult, and then you open up. And then the curious aspect, I was looking at the performance review that I had with my boss, and he said, you're curious enough. And I was like, oh, I don't think you can be ever curious enough. So tell us a little more. And then also the joint problem solving. I mean, like it's about being together. I always use, when I do coaching, the word together. I think that's the most important. Like, a lot of leaders, they talk I, and I'm like, well, can we shift to we? And you say joint problem solving. So I think that's where we need to head in today's world.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first step helps us to overcome the emotional barriers. But then when we get to the curiosity side, it's important to blend that curiosity with compassion, because then your tone doesn't seem as threatening to the other side. And so you're genuinely trying to learn. And the more curious you are, the better you are going to be as a listener. And then when we transition into joint problem solving, we're inviting them into the problem solving process. We're not saying, hey, I'm the smart one in this conversation, you need to do this, because that creates resistance. And so the way that I think about it is collaboration builds commitment. When we work together and invite them into the process, they're going to be more committed to the outcome, because they say, this isn't just something that Kwame forced on me. I had a part in this too. Actually, this was my idea. And if people can feel a sense of ownership in the final outcome, it makes it a lot more likely that they're going to stick firm to that commitment going forward.
And I remember I told you I went to Teachers College where they have conflict resolution classes. And this is my book, Getting to Yes. I think everybody needs to have a copy next to your book that will be rebranded. But this is such an easy way to getting to yes, is how to learn and accept the people. And it's not so much about the position. Every 5 years, we should have a look at that book to just kind of like familiarize ourselves with what is it. And William Ury also talks about a positive no. What I think is also important to, and I do mindfulness training, that you're not so attached to the outcome, that you not always have to be right. And one of the questions that I sometimes ask is like, was this helpful? When you're in a situation, you're kind of like fighting, you have a conflict. I'm asking myself, was this really helpful? Or what outcome was that? So I thought that was somehow helping me to have a good conversation. So I'm wondering, what are the best questions that you have for the listeners?
This is and I like that you brought up that book, because that was the inspiration for the third part of the process, the collaborative negotiation aspect, and that's huge. And so I like to, with the questions that I ask, especially when it's a sensitive topic, I like to preface what I'm saying by saying, out of curiosity, because if you say out of curiosity, for some reason, it makes whatever you say afterwards just sound softer. I'm not exactly sure why, but I know it does. And so you could say, out of curiosity, what led you to that conclusion? And so, for example, if somebody is holding a belief that you might feel is rooted in bias or might have some kind of racial impact that they're not seeing, you could just say, out of curiosity, what led you to believe this? And so what you're doing is challenging the origin of these beliefs, because a lot of times when people believe something really, really strongly, they're not exactly sure where that idea became parts of their psyche. And when you ask questions like that, you're asking them to dig deeply within themselves and help them to do the introspection that they often don't do for themselves, and help them to realize, okay, I hold this belief, but I really don't have very good evidence for this to be true. And I think of it like I call it the gap theory of persuasion. If you ask good questions, you can help people to understand the gap in their understanding. And when they realize that, it triggers a little bit of curiosity on their side. Oh, I have a gap in my understanding. I thought I knew this, but there's a blind spot there. And so the person who's asking the question, they might say, well, help me to understand what's going on here. I don't understand. It makes it more likely for them to listen after you've exposed that gap through asking questions with the proper tone.
With the proper tone, a very valuable insight, right? The proper tone. So the body language and also the proper tone is important when you have those discussions.
Yep.
Out of curiosity, it almost to me feels like a little magic. So you take whatever, you almost take a magic wand and like, out of curiosity, what can we do together?
Right. It's a lot less threatening. Curiosity is never really seen as something that's bad, right? So if you're just saying, I'm just wondering here, because I think the assumption on the other side might be the reason you're asking the question out of aggression. So you're making it clear why you're asking the question, and it really helps.
Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful. Out of curiosity. I hope all the listeners are writing that down. Out of curiosity, what can we do together? I'm still interested in, what do you do when you don't work? Now you're such a busy person. How do you rejuvenate? How do you re-energize yourself? I mean, you have the most beautiful smile. And
thank you. Yeah, it's tough. And the thing is, I like what I do. And so when people ask me, hey, Kwame, how late do you work? I say, I work 10 minutes from my house. So when people ask me that, I say, when I get a text from Whitney saying, when are you coming home? I'd say, okay, well, it's time to come home now. Because I struggle with that off switch. But I love playing chess. I play chess online on my phone. I'm a strategic thinker. And so even the games that I play, I like to keep that mind activated. And then in the mornings, usually around 5:30, I go to the gym, work out for an hour, come back home, play with Kai for a little bit, then take him to daycare. And then it's back on the grind, just getting back into the office and putting in work. So it's fun for me to continue to build the business. I like learning around the business too. So I try to challenge myself to get through a book every week to make sure that I'm keeping my skills sharp and learning new things, because it makes me a better service provider. So if I'm coaching somebody or presenting, I have a deeper reservoir of knowledge that I can use to help people. We think about it, sometimes you might make a point coming from one direction, and 30% of the audience could get it. Then you can make the same point coming from a different direction using a different analogy, and then the rest of the audience can get it. And I think the more stories you collect and the more disciplines you begin to, the better references you can make in order to become a better teacher.
Yeah, it's again that curiosity, right? I feel like when you're a coach, you need to be versatile in many subjects. I do global coaching, so you need to know about different cultures. If you kind of like don't know where the people come from, how can you be an effective coach?
Absolutely. And you think about athletes, the best athletes are students of the game. They can make references to different players at different times and different circumstances and learn from that. I really like to think of myself as a student of the game in a similar way. You're never going to reach a point of perfect knowledge. And I think that's really exciting. You're just constantly improving your skill over and over and over again. And unlike an athlete where there is an arc of success where maybe, for instance, with tennis, 18 to 20 years old, you're you're maturing, you're getting better. About 25 to 30, you're at your peak, and then you start to go down, unless you're Roger Federer and you can play until you're 40. But it starts to go down, and then you're done. But when it comes to your mind and your intellect and yourself as a professional, your skills keep on increasing until retirement. Hope. Exactly. You have a longer career, and that's super exciting.
So you said you're reading a book a week. What is your book that you're reading now?
Yes. And so now with all of the social unrest as it relates to race, I'm really trying to focus a lot of my learnings on that, because even though I spent years doing civil rights work, it's been a while, because I shifted to business law, started the American Negotiation Institute and things like that. So I'm a bit rusty. And so the book that I'm reading has a bit of an offensive title, but it's really helpful. It tells you exactly what it is. It's called How to Be Less Stupid About Race. It's been a really, really interesting take on society, thinking about institutional racism versus individual racism, and how people really don't understand the differences about those, and understanding the history. It's really interesting, and it's been helpful for me just learning more about it.
Yeah. Wow. I like when you say you're a little rusty, right? Compared to a lot of people. I think you're one of the top experts here, and we can only learn from you. So the podcast Negotiate Anything, that's coming out every week. And I know we had to postpone our podcast because you had, like, I think you said you had 500-600 people on that episode that was live. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, I was so impressed.
I appreciate it. It was a kind of a crazy situation. So I told my audience and my connections on LinkedIn that I was going to do a presentation on how to have difficult conversations about race. And I told people, listen, I will stay as long as you have questions, no matter how long that'll be. And I did not think it was going to get that many people. I honestly wanted it to be smaller so I could kind of check that box for myself and say, okay, I did my good deed. Now I can go back to business where I'm not emotionally burdened, and the conversation is a lot easier for me. Then after 3 days, it got up to 1,047 people registered, and then about 650 showed up. What should have been just like a 30-minute, 40-minute presentation turned into a 3-hour-long Q&A marathon on Friday afternoon. And that's when I realized that people are really interested. It led to a lot of media features, CNBC, Forbes, and USA Today, all asking, because the thing is, we're having a lot of conversations about race, but we're not talking about how to talk about race. And that's a unique angle, because people really struggle with it.
I think some people say we try to talk about it, we take pictures, but it's how to have that difficult conversation about race.
But it needs to happen. And that's the difficult part, because I think the difficulty, like I said before, it causes people to avoid the conversation. And maybe you've had a conversation that didn't go well, so you say, hey, never again am I going to do it. Or you've seen somebody else have a conversation and it didn't go well for them. You're like, I'm not going to be like them. And so the reality is, like I said, those types of things perpetuate the problems that we see in society today. And so we need more people to have these conversations, and also become more aware of how racism impacts our day-to-day lives. And so I was thinking about it today as I was getting to the gym, of a metaphor. I grew up in a house. It was me, my mom, my dad, my brother. So 3 men, 1 woman. Then I went to school, went to university, and all of my roommates were guys all the time. And then I got married. And so then me leaving the seat up became a problem for the first time ever, right? And so the thing is, for me, I didn't see it as a problem. I saw it. I physically, my eyes saw the toilet seat up, and I said, this is the way things should be. And now that I'm married to Whitney's like, hey, you see that thing that you always said was okay? It's not okay, and you need to fix it. And I think that's how the issues as it relates to race really manifest themselves in society. It's so ubiquitous that we don't see it. It's like trying to convince a fish that it's wet. This is just how I am.
Yeah.
I don't really recognize it.
Yeah.
And so I think right now we're going through a period of a great awakening for a lot of people. And for many people, they need to be ushered through that process, helping them to understand what the reality of the world is, number one, and then also what we can do about it. Because even if you start to recognize that things need to change, you have to have that next step of first taking responsibility and recognizing I should do something. And then we have the conversation about what we can do. And the compassionate curiosity framework can usher people through that process in a way that is more palatable. It's going to be uncomfortable.
Yes.
We can't avoid that discomfort, but we can avoid unnecessary discomfort through the process.
And I mean, I come from human resources, so they're, talking about diversity and inclusion. This is always a huge topic, and I've been interested for a long time in women leadership. What can I'm a white woman, right? What can I do? I'm happy to help. I'm happy to stand up. I always say the Statue of Liberty is my role model. She stands there if it's raining or shine or snow or what have you. Give us maybe one insight, like what can we do to, I don't like the word help so much, but what can we do to empower others and to maybe that's the better word, to take the first next step and the next good step.
Exactly, a good step, a step in the right direction. And I think first of all is recognizing that there's something that we can do. And the term I like is an ally, because it shows that we're in it together. You think about World War II, it wasn't people coming together just to help out. It was, oh no, this is a problem for everyone. We all are in this together. It affects us all in ways that we sometimes can see and sometimes are less obvious. And I think especially in the workplace, we have a lot of work to do, because the workplace is a central source of not just income, a source of our socialization, right? The majority of our waking hours are going to be spent in the workplace. And so it's not just about making sure that we have equal opportunities within the workplace for advancement, for the acquisition of power and the acquisition of more financial resources. It's also making sure that we have an inclusive environment to make sure that the people who are here, all of them feel included and part of the collective whole. That's a major part of it. And so if usually when you look into a workplace and you look at the lower levels of the workplace, you recognize there can be decent diversity there, especially if you look at the custodial staff or something like that. And so, but then as you start to go higher and higher and higher, it just becomes wider and wider and wider and more male dominated. And so we have to ask ourselves, what processes do we have in place that are leading to these types of disparate outcomes? Because here we can recognize there are women and minorities who are of just stellar quality, but why aren't they not matriculating to the top? And so like as an example, one time was a company that I was working with, and they said that all of the social engagements that were geared toward helping people who are at the lower levels or rising stars get in front of leaders within the organization, almost all of them were golf outings. And so you might say, oh, what's the problem with golf? Well, the thing is, most of the time minorities don't play golf, and usually it's a white male type of thing. And people might say, yeah, we can take lessons, right? Okay, we could, or we could do something that's more inclusive. I
would go with the latter. Right? Yes, I don't play golf either.
Right. Yeah. And so it's little things like this, and recognize that it's benign. There was no malintent behind it, but that's really what we need to do. We need to start having these conversations to help people recognize the blind spots, so we can start to make changes that we want to see within our organization. And awareness is a big part of it, to also find creative ways to connect with people who are different from us. Because if we stay on our typical patterns, we're going to start to polarize each other, polarize ourselves. We self-segregate a lot of times, and that's problematic. We don't find ourselves in the same communities in general where we live, there's not much diversity there. Places of worship, same. And then our workplaces, especially if you want to try to get to the higher levels, you're not going to be fraternizing with people who of minority status. And so I think we have to be more intentional about finding ways to bring people together, because then we can start to have those conversations and perspectives can start to shift. Because a lot of times people don't recognize that they're looking at things through a singular lens, because when they say, hey buddy, what do you think about this situation? They're asking somebody with the exact same perspective. So they're like, hey, no problem here. And so if you find yourself in that type of racial echo chamber, there are going to be a lot of blind spots that you're going to miss. So bringing people together just so they can have these conversations is going to be a major part of the process.
And the more diverse a team is, the more creative and innovative you can be. I mean, that's what we hear all the time. But on the flip side, it might be more difficult as a leader to have a very diverse team. So some people, they might just say like, let's have more of me, meaning the same of me, and then it might be easier, which is the wrong approach these days.
Exactly.
Any final thoughts before we leave? I mean, I could talk to you for hours and hours, but I know you have how many podcasts you have ahead of you?
No, this was fun. I think really the parting message is this: conflict is an opportunity. And that has to be really the parting message, because otherwise, if we don't see it as an opportunity, what most likely are we going to see it as? We're going to see it as a threat, and threats need to be avoided. That's the way most people think. But if we recognize that conflict is an opportunity, it's an opportunity to connect, opportunity to learn, opportunity to solve problems. There are myriad opportunities on the other side of these difficult conversations. We just need to be creative enough to see it. And once we start to train our minds to see these opportunities, it's going to make it more likely for us to actually approach them and have the conversations that we need to have.
Thank you so much. This was really insightful, and good luck with all your endeavors. And everybody should make sure to listen to the podcast, Negotiate Anything. And also on the website, we can find information on how to have difficult conversation about race. And I would like to add the word now. Now is the time. Thank you so much, Kwame. What a great episode. I'm so honored. Kwame Christian. Check him out. We have all the information on his American Negotiation Institute. And out of curiosity, what are you taking away? Now is the time. How to have a difficult conversation about race. Take it from the Iron Woman. Every Monday, every Wednesday, we have episode. Don't miss out. Listen, leave a review, and see you next week. Thank you.